Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Area Study webinar. This is presented by my company, Forward Observer. I am Sam Culper, your instructor for tonight, and we have a lot to go over. Tonight, I want to teach you how to build an area study, a good start anyway, and especially want you to understand why information, or in our case, intelligence, is the most often overlooked part of preparedness. Information is absolutely critical. All right. Well, first, I want to tell you very briefly about my company, Forward Observer. Our main product is a daily intelligence threat report, and also do a podcast version where my goal really is to provide the big picture understanding of the threats that our country currently faces, and that's a growing list. And I won't go into this too much, but if you like what you learned tonight and you want more of it, then do go check us out at members.forwardobserver.com. And then the other thing that I provide is intelligence training. So I have a YouTube channel where I try to post on there more frequently now. Do go watch those free videos. I've produced a ton of free content and training that's available on YouTube. If you like what you learned tonight, you like what you see on YouTube, then I ask you to support my mission here at Forward Observer and get some more advanced training for yourself. And you can do that at members.forwardobserver.com. And lastly, just very briefly, you should know that I'm a former intelligence analyst. I spent nearly a decade in the intelligence community as a soldier and a contractor. 40 months of that time, a little over 3 years, I spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, my main instructing job is teaching the tactical intelligence course. This course is in this area study walkthrough is part of something that I call SHTF intelligence, or shit hits the fan intelligence. And my students are folks from all walks of life. But the one thing that binds just about 100% of them together are they're into some level of community security, or they're in a preparedness group, or they're in some other kind of security group, which is to say that they're going to get a chance for some real world applications for the stuff that they learn. Now, let's get into the actual intelligence part of this. Why intelligence? Well, we need intelligence because everyone has blind spots. During an emergency, there are going to be things that we simply don't know. And we go back to that hurricane or tornado scenario, and we may not have access to cell phones and the internet. This is really why we need to do an area study sooner rather than later. This is often referred to being in the situation where we don't know enough. We don't know enough about the things going on around us to make well-informed decisions. This is called the fog of war. And we need to have information so that we can make these decisions. And in some cases, we're just not going to have it. So this is really the first reason why the area study is so important. So we can gather the information that we're going to need prior to an emergency taking place. And the more we know about intelligence gathering, the greater access we can have to timely and accurate information, which means we can produce better intelligence and make better decisions. Now, the fog of war was brought to us by a Prussian military strategist named Karl von Clausewitz. You may have heard of him before. He's kind of famous in military strategy. And he wrote in his book on war, quote, "War is the realm of uncertainty. 3/4 of the factors on which action is based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty. A sensitive and discriminating judgment is called for, a skilled intelligence to send out the truth." And really, we can say conflict or emergency scenarios are absolutely no different than war as far as intelligence is concerned, because we need to make decisions. We have to make timely and well-informed decisions. Your survivability during an emergency, especially during a protracted emergency or some protracted conflict, or your success in that conflict, is going to be largely dictated by your access to information, and especially your ability to make sense of it. This is the root of intelligence gathering and intelligence analysis. Now, lots of people are going to have next to zero access to information during the next emergency because this is not a problem that most people are planning to solve. I know there's this huge focus on buying things, and unfortunately, there's not as much focus on developing skills, especially in intelligence. And most of these people, and even in our preparedness community, and even in the greater patriot community, most of them don't even realize it, and they're not going to realize that it's a problem until it's too late for them. So I'm glad you're here. Your access to information, or your ability to gather information and make sense of it, is the single greatest factor in decision making. So let's talk about this OODA loop for a second. OODA, it stands for observe, orient, decide, act. It's a cycle. Move above the tactical level and we kind of go to an organizational level, then we are looking at the same OODA loop. Observe and orient applies to intelligence. Okay, observe is intelligence gathering. Orient is intelligence analysis. And decide and act, that's really more of an operations function, which we really won't get into tonight. So really the bottom line here is that we must observe, we must gather information, we have to orient, we have to make sense of it before we can decide and act. And so deciding and acting is very difficult, if not impossible, if we don't have this intelligence. Now, really the bottom line here is that we're going to have to make decisions, and decisions become easier with better information. We want to make well-informed decisions. Why an area study? Well, number one, it increases our survivability. And I'm not talking about food or water or shelter, which are elements of our survival. I'm not saying they're unimportant, but I'm really talking about developing the skills that increase our ability to survive, which includes intelligence. We can gather information, we can analyze it, we can begin to draw some conclusions, and then come away with more realistic expectations of the future. You know, a lot of people talk about, well, I'm preparing for an EMP, or I'm preparing for a grid down, or an economic collapse, or a civil war, or whatever people are preparing for. And what they should really understand a lot better than they probably do is that they're actually preparing for the follow-on effects of those events, right? I mean, an economic collapse is not going to kill you. The second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth order effects are actually what's going to pose a threat, a direct, imminent, threat to you. So really, when we say, well, we're preparing for an economic collapse, what we're really doing is preparing for the local follow-on effects of that economic collapse. If we don't understand the second and third order effects, if we don't understand something that happens in New York or how something that happens in DC is going to eventually trickle down and affect us, like affect you in your community, in your neighborhood, or on your street, it's very unlikely that you're preparing for those specific things. So this is another reason why we do an area study. We can list out these various threats, and at the end, we're going to talk about a very easy way how to list out all these threats. We can list out these local threats, and then we can determine which of them actually poses the greatest risk to us. And then we can prioritize our preparedness and security planning for those top things. The area study, more than anything, the area study really drives that security and preparedness planning, which is why everyone absolutely must do an area study. Understanding cause and effect at the tactical level, or for in the civilian sense at the local community level, is going to allow us to anticipate future events. And it's pretty simple. X happens, or we're dealing with XYZ. We've identified and outlined these things in our area study. X happens, and now we automatically know to expect Y and Z to happen as follow-on effects. We know we can start to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And developing intelligence is what gives us that ability. And the area study is just an absolutely incredible tool for helping us to do that. Now, let's get into the area study. If only we had a checklist, if only some former intelligence analyst had sat down and made a list of what we need to put in our area study, if only we had some guide and format that told us exactly what information to gather and how to organize it. So let's jump into this right now. The area study overview. I talked about printing out area study material. So this is the beginning steps of an area study. I have this white folder that I've created. It has these section dividers in it. And this is how I space out these section dividers. So number one, I have a title page, and it's important. I put the title page on there, which includes the date. We put the date on there so we can understand how old this information is. If it's a few weeks old, there's a higher likelihood that it's still current as opposed to 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 months old. So that's number one. We go into our area of operations and our area of interest, and I'm going to jump into these in greater detail momentarily. And then we start to look at our operating environment. If you've seen a lot of my YouTube videos or you've been following me for a long time, I've developed these 6 layers of our operating environment. These are the 6 layers that I've identified that are really critical to understand in any SHTF scenario. And then after we go through those 6 layers of the operating environment, we look at the threat overview. All right, so let's look at an area of operations. So this is my AO, something we call the AO. Your area of operations is anywhere you expect to travel or operate, or anywhere you expect to defend. So, for this, you can see this is obviously my neighborhood. If you're bugging out, you need to do a route study. So if you have a bug out location or a farm or a ranch or some cabin in the woods, definitely do a route study. Essentially, so a lot of the same factors that we're going to talk about for this area study. And I also encourage you to do an area study for that location as well. Information dominance. I want to dominate this area, not only physically, but through information. I want to understand what's happening in my community. And that really especially applies to some SHTF scenario or emergency where, maybe there's an increased level of instability, or there's a higher crime rate, or there's literally bad guys or looters or whoever running through the neighborhood. It's absolutely critical that you have this information dominance. It's absolutely critical that you're able to collect this information of intelligence value in real time. So the first step really is, I highly encourage you, number one, to identify your area of operations. Okay, maybe if you're a small family, a family of 4, your AO might not extend beyond your property. Or maybe during this quarantine, your AO is between here and the grocery store. Maybe it's really situation dependent. It's really dependent on you. What I highly recommend people eventually get to is start a neighborhood watch and begin enlisting members of your neighborhood. The more sensors we have, the more access to information I am going to have as the intel guy. So I highly recommend you do that. And then, as always, this applies at every step. Identify your intelligence gaps. Our intelligence gaps are simply things that we don't know, but we need to know. So as you come across a piece of information, or as you come across something that you don't know, write it down. That's phase 1 of the intelligence cycle, is identifying what you know and what you don't know. And then we can take what we don't know and then start tasking out collection for all that stuff. All right. And then we have the area of interest. And, the question we have to start asking ourselves is, well, what outside my area of operations, or what outside my AO is actually important? What can indirectly affect me, and where is it? What or where do I want to monitor? So we have the AI there. You can see on the north end of that area of interest, this is Southwest Parkway. That's a high-speed avenue of approach. It's a very busy, traffic-wise, it's a very busy road. And then I want to identify who is turning off that road, or how much traffic is coming back there. If at all possible, that's a place that I want to monitor. There down on the southeast side, you can see that little ring road right there. That's a trailer park. And there's all sorts of stuff that you'd expect to find going on at a trailer park. So that's another area that I would really like to focus on. So I hope this kind of gives you an idea of what kinds of things you might include in your area of interest. Those may be police stations or substations, grocery stores, Walmart or Target. And you can see by the shapes on here, they don't have to be a perfect square or a perfect circle, right? We can have some funky polygon if we want to rope in a certain area or certain, part of our town or part of our area to really better understand it. That's number one. Number two, we can always change the boundaries of our area of operations or area of interest. So if we get to the point where we realize, hey, actually this area is too big, well, we can make it smaller. If it's too small, or maybe we join a preparedness group, or maybe we build a preparedness group in our neighborhood, and all of a sudden we need to expand our AO, we can do that as well. All right, now we get into the first layer of our operating environment, the physical terrain. So one of the first few things I'm going to start looking at for the physical terrain, number one, I want to get a topographical map, have my topo map handy, and actually look at what the terrain actually looks like around me. I want to find elevation. Elevation allows us to see farther. We're talking about locally in our area throwing up a ham radio repeater. So obviously we want that to be at a higher point than surrounding areas. I want to look for choke points. Are there bridges? Is there dense vegetation? What around in my area can be interdicted or we can interdict. So I hear these stories about these people who live up way back up in the mountains, and they're like, "Hey, nobody's coming up this mountain because there's one road up." And they found this choke point. They said in a worst case scenario, SHTF, they're gonna chop down a couple of trees, and then nobody's driving up that hill or nobody's driving up that road. So that would be an example of a potential choke point. We want to, me particularly, I want to find those to make sure that I don't get interdicted. And then we also have alternative travel. So if you live in an urban area, you might have some underground pathways like a tunnel. If you live in forested areas, you might have logging roads. We're looking for things that we typically refer to as lines of drift. And a line of drift means there may not be an established road there, but it is due to the physical terrain. It's an area where people are naturally going to be funneled, right? I mean, this is why we have mountain passes. That's essentially a line of drift. You're not going over the top of the mountain. You're going over the path of least resistance, called a line of drift. I want to identify all that stuff, make sure that that is clearly annotated on my map. And as always, identify your intelligence gaps. If there's questions, things that you realize that you don't know yet, write that down. We can task that out for collection. I highly encourage everyone, get out and walk around your neighborhood. Next, we move on to the human terrain. Who lives in your area of operations? We're looking at names and identities, demographics. The human terrain is way more than just race and age, and really attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. What do people think about law enforcement? What do people think about government? What do people think about firearms? What do people think about you? I also want to look for political affiliation. You can see this map here. Those blue pins are Democrats. Those red pins are Republicans. And this is not a statement of whether these people are good or not. I just want to understand the political terrain of my neighborhood. I also want to look for influencers and key personnel. So if you live next to an electrical engineer or a doctor or a firefighter or a policeman, or you live next door to the mayor, I'll definitely put that in your area study. And also, let me say this. There are a number of ways that we can look for information on people. Facebook is a really good example. I mean, really any kind of social media. But let me just say this about Facebook and social media. Don't just Facebook stalk people in your neighborhood. Get out and meet these people if you're not already. I would suggest holding like a community barbecue, but I don't think that's going to happen for some time. So we might have to get a little bit creative with, exactly how we meet people. But, a friend of mine who lives down in Houston, one day he went and knocked on 20 doors and he met people. And this, by the way, this is during COVID-19. So he got a lot of people who, wouldn't shake his hand or, fist bumped him or something like that. And he went around his neighborhood and he said, look, I'm concerned about what could happen in our neighborhood if there's an increase in crime. Any number of things could happen. And so he got a list of names and addresses and email addresses and phone numbers. And he's essentially trying to build a neighborhood watch on steroids. So definitely get out, go meet these people, especially, veterans or people who have unique skills and abilities. And then, as always, identify your intelligence gaps. Write down the things that you don't know but need to know. Next, we move on to critical infrastructure. Questions for me are, where does my energy come from? Where's my clean water come from? Another thing we might look at is hospitals and trauma centers, especially those that are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools is also important. If there is a catastrophic event, if FEMA comes into your town or FEMA sets up some kind of shop, a lot of times they put refugees in school, at or near schools. They'll do these food distribution centers around schools. So if I live next door to a school, I want to be aware. A lot of this stuff can be done on Google Earth. Well, we don't have time for a Google Earth walkthrough right now, but one thing we can do, if you're comfortable with it, is get on Google Earth and start dropping pins like I showed you in my neighborhood right here. And you can do this for any number of things. The great thing about Google Earth, though, if you're comfortable using that, is we can export these KML files. So we can send them to a friend. We can put them on a flash drive. We can email them, or do whatever you're comfortable doing. I know a lot of people are very security conscious. I am as well. So we may want to look at some security options if we do that. But that's the great thing. Everyone can pitch in on Google Earth, and then we can put all these layers on top of each other. Put all these places on the same Google Earth sheet. We can print that off and throw that in our area study. Next, I want to look at politics and governance. That's the next layer of our operating environment. So I can get on official websites. A lot of times, the political parties will have some kind of directory, so I can kind of understand, who these people are. I want to look at politics and governance because these are the people who are making the rules under which I live. These are the people who are going to make rules about my potential livelihood. I want to know how these people feel about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. If these people want to raise or lower my taxes, if these folks want to make more onerous laws and regulations, that's something I want to know. So I can really have a much better idea of where I might live in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. Your government changes, and then they just get in there like a wrecking ball and just destroy everything. Destroyed a lot of good places because of that. Social media as well is a really great place to find information. If you have a city councilman or city council person or county commissioner or whoever, county commission board, find them on social media and look up the things that they're talking about. Get out and practice your Google Foo. So get online, search their names, find out what they're about. Also, if you get on your official government websites, you're going to be able to find names and phone numbers and email addresses. So if we have to contact these people during an emergency, we've already got this information. Next, I'm looking at military, law enforcement, and security. So let's focus on military right now. Let me tell you a quick story. Several years ago, I was teaching a two-day SHTF intelligence class in a very rural county in a southern state. And I got there on Friday afternoon, and I met up with the group's leaders. It was a private class. And they said, hey, we're very concerned about, this was back during the Obama administration. They said, we're very concerned about the Army coming in and going door to door and confiscating all of our firearms. And so I said, look, let's sit down. And we started going over this process. And I asked the guy, where are your local military? What's your local military infrastructure look like? And they had like a National Guard center that was, I don't know, like 60 or maybe 100 miles away or something like that. It was a long ways out. And I said, well, okay, well, what kind of units are there? And we did a little searching. It turned out it was a transportation company, not a door kicker. Okay, so not an infantry company or anything like that. And then I started saying, what kind of critical infrastructure do you have in this county? And they had one power substation, which means not a very high likelihood that armed troops were going to come into that very rural part of this very rural county and try to confiscate everyone's firearms. And so this group, in the course of about 15 minutes, kind of figured out, what? Actually, probably those meth heads cooking methamphetamines up in the hills pose a way higher threat to us than martial law or, door-to-door gun confiscation. So, this is another reason how an area study can be particularly helpful. We sit down, we write all this stuff out. We have this formal understanding, this framework of understanding for our area, and then we can begin to figure out where our risks actually are. So there's lots of websites. Definitely look up your active regular components along with your National Guard and Reserve in your area if that's something you're concerned about. And next, we move on to law enforcement. So a lot of this information is pretty available on websites. I encourage you, find out what your local police chief is all about. Find out what he believes about the Second Amendment or the Fourth Amendment. Same for your county sheriff. Get on and really understand, what these police officers might do during an emergency. Also, we can go to radioreference.com. It's one of many websites where we can go and find local emergency services frequencies. I'm a huge advocate of having a police scanner. I know more and more they're becoming basically obsolete because a lot of these law enforcement agencies are moving to encrypted communications. Still, for the average area, I think a police scanner is worthwhile. You can go to radioreference.com and find all these frequencies. And again, print this stuff out and put it in your area study. Here's the deal. You may know all this stuff already. Something happens to you And now all of a sudden your wife and kids, or your community or your family might need this information. So I would say do it for them as much as anything else. And then also, this third part of this layers of military, law enforcement, and security is security. So private security companies, you can get on your, maybe go to your Chamber of Commerce or get on your state's Secretary of State website and do an entity search and look for private security companies, executive protection companies. You can, get on Facebook or get online and look up what militias you have in your area. I'm not necessarily saying that is a good or a bad thing. It could be good or bad depending on who are in those groups. If you have any Hawaiian shirt enthusiasts or igloo construction clubs in your area who are all about that boog life, that's a reference to the boogaloo, which is what a lot of people are calling this potential Civil War too. If you have these folks in your area too, I think that's knowing that they're there certainly has intelligence value. That the value is kind of in the eye of the beholder. Seek these people out. Go make friends with these folks if you're comfortable with doing that. Build a network. Intelligence is about networking, and we want to build a flow of information. And I'm incredibly interested in building access to information, which typically means going out and finding people to meet, becoming friends with these people, getting them into a preparedness group, and then sharing information. Super important stuff. All right. And then finally, the last layer is economics and finance. So I want to start looking up who are my major employers in the area? What are the major industries? Back during the 2008 recession, there are three industries that were hurt the most by far. Number one, construction. Number two, retail. And number three, professional services. So if your neighborhood is high in construction and retail employees, then you may well could have high unemployment in your area. It looks like we are going to have a recession. It looks like the second quarter is going to be pretty darn steep. How far it extends beyond that, I don't think anyone is sure right now. So, understanding that your county's or your city's economic picture is especially important. A lot of these cities and counties, they generate revenue through sales tax. And so during this quarantine, people are at home, not going out, and they're not at the mall or shopping in a lot of places. And these counties and cities are taking a hurting on tax revenue. And I'm not making a case that, that's a necessarily good or bad thing. And you look at a recession and, what's almost always one of the first things they cut? First responders. So that might be your area. You might have fewer police officers. You might have fewer paramedics operating out there, EMTs, maybe fewer firefighters. Definitely something you should look into, the economic health of your city and county. Also, unemployment rates. We're going to see those spiking in a majority of places. They already are. Also, look at agricultural economic health. We're seeing a ton, especially in the Midwest. You're seeing a ton of farms file for bankruptcy and going out of business. And these mom and pop, dairies and these mom and pop farms are going belly up all across the United States. Do some searching and see what a bale of hay costs. See how much a steer costs if you live in a more rural area. If you live in a city, it's going to be more difficult. But really just get a sense of how healthy your farmers are, because they grow your food. Also, I'm going to look at economic disparity in high and low income areas. I want to print off these maps. You can go to a website called city-data.com. Print those maps out, put them in your area study. And let me just say this too. It's not even so much that printing this stuff out is the ultimate act. The ultimate act is searching for this stuff and learning it and absorbing things that you probably don't really come into contact with. Finding information that you're not really exposed to very often, and then including that in your understanding of the area, so that when there is an emergency, we can say, well, I know a lot about this area. Here are my top concerns. And then boom, that's exactly, those things are what you should be preparing for. The local effects of these national level emergencies. That's what's most important for us to identify. This is fundamentally intelligence gathering and analysis. All right. And then we move into the threat environment. And there are 4 types of threats that we need to concern ourselves with. What I recommend you doing is either individually or as a part of a preparedness group, write down these 4 threat types and do a brainstorming session and just try to identify as many of these as you can. So, conventional threats are things like police states, standing armies, invading militaries. So, write down all known, suspected, or potential conventional threats that you're concerned with. It doesn't mean that they are likely, it just means that they're potential threats. Next is irregular. So, irregular threats are things like gangs and mobs, looters, individual criminals, organized criminals. Those are irregular threats. Be as specific as you can. In your area study for irregular threats, don't put gangs. Be specific. What gangs operate in your area? If you don't know, you can go ask somebody, engage in a little human intelligence gathering, maybe get online. A lot of states have state gang task forces. I tell you, we're pretty lucky here in Texas because the Department of Public Safety puts out an annual gang report every year, and they'll tell you, they won't tell you like small, tiny little local gangs, but the big gangs, they'll tell you where they operate, what counties they're active in. A lot of times they'll estimate the number of members they have. So this is all good information, what we call information of intelligence value. Next, we have catastrophic threats. So catastrophic threats are mass casualty causing. So hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, flooding, whatever natural disasters your area is subject to, definitely write those down. And then also, man-made, or I should include pandemics as well, or pandemics or epidemics. They can also be man-made. I'm not saying it's likely, but if you live next to a nuclear reactor or something like that, that would definitely go on my list of catastrophic threats. Not saying it's likely, just saying it's possible. And then finally, the 4th threat type is disruptive threats. So things like ice storms, COVID-19 has been fundamentally disruptive. It's keeping people at home. Anything that's going to disrupt your operations, or disrupt your security. So a power outage, an ice storm, severe weather would be fundamentally disruptive, especially if we're talking about imagery intelligence. We're talking about overhead assets like drones, high wind, sandstorms, heavy rain. It's going to keep not just our drones, a lot of that's going to keep our aircraft out of the sky as well. So that is a disruptive threat. Write out each of these threat types on a sheet of paper. Be as specific as you can. Write down as many as you can. I recommend group work for a lot of things. This is especially group work because even if someone says a threat or has an idea that maybe it's not that great, but maybe it creates another idea. Maybe it spurs a thought that someone would otherwise not have had. That's what I highly recommend you do. All right. Now let's go over these top 4 reasons to do your area study. Number 1, intelligence drives decision-making. We need to make well-informed decisions. Anybody can flip a coin, make a decision. We need to be well-informed, especially during an emergency when we might have to make time-sensitive decisions. Like we must decide now. We don't have 15 days to run this through the intelligence cycle and get this policymaker some intelligence estimate. Okay, we got like 15 seconds. We got to make a decision now. Having this intelligence makes that a heck of a lot easier to do. Number 2, we need to know what to prepare for. The more work we do to understand our threat environment, the more specific we can get. And the more specific we can get, really the better prepared we can be, because we're not just preparing for this vague, unknown, gangs in the area. We're talking about, hey, there's this 15th Street gang and there's 16 members. Here are some of the members and here are the vehicles that they drive. Number 3, you'll have it when you need it. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we'll have it. And then if we are in a situation where there is no cell phone, there is no internet, there's no power, we're going to have this information. We can act on it. Or we can at least be better aware. Number 4, the area study is not just for you. We may be in a situation where we get 2 or 3 days into an emergency and all of a sudden our neighbors are going to be scared. let's just say worst case scenario, maybe they'll be scared. Maybe they'll be highly motivated individuals, and maybe they'll really want to join that preparedness group now. And maybe you have family members who are going to be in that situation. So I want to make sure that I have this area studied so I can sit down with this group, or I can say, hey, flip through this, read this, get caught up to speed, understand, all these hidden parts of the community that you never knew about, understand this stuff, and then let's figure out how you can contribute to the mission. Let's figure out what you can do for this group, not just what the group can do for you. All right. So really the bottom line on the area study is that the time to gather this is right now. All right. I'm going to open up for some Q&A. I just want to remind everyone, you can go to members.forwardobserver.com and join Forward Observer. You can become a member. You can get access to my daily intelligence report and podcast, where I talk about a lot of these national level events that could trickle down and cause problems for us all. And then also I have some intelligence training in there. And I'm going to be doing these monthly webinars where I try to teach people things about intelligence, something that's actionable that they can go out and do, where they can improve their level of preparedness. You can do that at members.forwardobserver.com.